Welcome to another edition of the CDG BizCast. I am your host, Christian Gonzalez, co-owner of Creativity Design Group, a digital marketing firm in Houston, Texas. In today's episode, we are going to be discussing how small business owners can learn from larger corporations that have gone out of business. We're going to put a prime focus on Bed Bath & Beyond and Tuesday Morning, two large major retailers that just recently went out of business at the time of this taping. And it's important to understand as a business owner, especially as a small business owner, what can you do to prevent your company from following a similar fate as these two did. Other former major retailers will be discussed as well, but we'll be putting a prime focus on those two due to their recent departures from the market. So joining me today is my lifestyle expert Justin, and also for the first time on CDG BizCast, please welcome Draven, also known as Optopolis on YouTube. Welcome to the show, guys. Thank you for joining me today. So Justin, what would you like to say about these recent departures from the retail market, and in general, as a consumer, why do you feel these two brands went out of business? Or if you've not shopped at either one of them recently, what can small business owners learn from large corporations? What could they offer to their customer base that could keep them relevant in the retail industry?
One of the big things that annoys me about major corporations is the rise of the self-checkout, self-scan machines. I really don't like them, and I prefer regular cashiers, because there are some things that those AI machines cannot do. And even though Bed Bath & Beyond did not really utilize the self-scan, they did not innovate to use their storefronts as miniature warehouses for their online web portal. That was one of their biggest mistakes when COVID hit. That's one of the big things that took them down, is they did not meet the consumer where the consumer was at on their laptops, desktops, and mobile phones. As for Tuesday Morning, that retailer I'd never actually shopped at or even been inside of. So I don't know a whole lot about that company, other than that their balance sheet became too far unbalanced between their debt load and their income. They couldn't make their payments, and eventually they just had to liquidate the company to settle their debts because they didn't have another option from lack of foot traffic in their stores. Probably for the same reason that Bed Bath & Beyond went under in that respect. Although I will say that one of the early pioneers of buy online, pick up in store was Circuit City, because I remember back in 2002, I was 18. I used a library public computer with my first ever paycheck card to purchase an MP3 player on the Circuit City website, and I took the bus up there and a good 2 or 3 hours away to pick it up and ride home listening to my music. I even bought the extended memory card for it, which was really cool at the time. And that's one of the pioneering things they did. And they didn't keep up with technology because they failed to out-innovate remaining big players, Target, Walmart, Amazon, eBay, and the other larger corporations that are still functioning. That's what took Circuit City down, is they didn't stay with the times. When things started going digital, they didn't shift gears properly before their company was taken down by too much debt, too much inventory, and not enough foot traffic to generate sufficient sales to cover expenses.
Yes, I agree. I definitely agree. That's what brought their downfall. In fact, you could say Tuesday Morning went under for that reason alone, which we're going to talk about later on. Draven, what would you like to say about the downfall of these companies and what you personally felt was the reason for their downfall based on your observations as a consumer?
I guess the first thing I would like to reply to is his initial comments about self-checkouts. Interestingly, at least one location definitely had self-checkouts at the Bed Bath & Beyond. I actually discovered it because of another retail enthusiast in the community that does videos up in like Oregon and Washington, that area. One of his videos, he literally had that in this video that there were self-checkouts there, which was interesting to me because I'd never seen that in a Bed Bath & Beyond. And as far as I know, there wasn't really a Bed Bath & Beyond in my area. Wyoming, Colorado, that area that had self-checkouts. It's kind of interesting. I think that kind of can go either way for whether that is a factor in something closing. Because on one hand, I get people like the part of not having to deal with necessarily all the talking sometimes, because I know sometimes it can be time consuming and stuff like that. On the other hand, I do think that there can be the upside of, at the end of the day, having the socialization. I do think there are some spots where maybe they could have been a little more prepared. I'll be real, I'm not someone who goes online a lot, but besides maybe a little bit on Amazon and stuff like that, I don't really go online as much, but there is that, I suppose. And on to another part of this too. Personally, I never went to Tuesday Morning too much, although I knew someone who did, and initially they really liked it, but they did start having issues in more recent years where they didn't have as much of what they wanted. Bed Bath & Beyond, though, I did go there a lot throughout my, teenage years and stuff like that, and that's kind of a primary place where we got stuff like bathroom supplies, kitchen supplies, stuff like that nobody else had, or maybe other places did have some variant, but it wasn't as good as what they had. I mean, I think even the toaster oven in our kitchen in my home right now is literally from Bed Bath & Beyond. It does kind of sadden me to some extent that it's gone now, because now I can't really go there. It's just like, I know this is slightly beyond the topic, but it's kind of just like Toys R Us, where if there's this very specific toy I wanted that only Toys R Us had, I can't go to the Toys R Us anymore. And I know I'm older now, but still, if there's something specific I want that I know no other store will have, I can't go there now. And I'd kind of be intrigued to hear a little bit of thoughts from both of you on that topic from there.
It's interesting that you should mention that, because that's one thing I've noticed about these online retailers, is that because they store everything in the warehouse, they can basically ship it to you as long as you'll cover the shipping cost. And that's one thing that I think far too many people fail to understand about those so-called free shipping promotions, is that, well, it just means you're paying more for what you're buying, because they're building the cost of the shipping into the price of the product.
It's kind of an interesting thing there, because I mean, even when you set up your own like merch shop on Etsy, like I actually kind of have, you actually end up experiencing some of the stuff that they end up experiencing, and that you have to think about the cost of shipping and stuff like that. And if you want to bake into the cost of the shirt, or if you want to be kind of separate, and I think there can be up and downsides of that edge of it too. Free shipping kind of tends to be, it seems like it does encourage to some extent, depending on the situation. Exceptions exist, but it does seem like if we have free shipping, quote unquote, it ends up being a slightly more enticing than having to pay for the product and shipping, which is kind of interesting, because no matter what, you ultimately pay that price anyway.
Yes, that's correct, because the cost of shipping is one of many costs that are passed on to the customer when they decide to make that purchase. When they say free shipping, it really isn't free, and I get asked about this all the time by my own e-commerce clients, or just some of my colleagues who sell products themselves. They always ask, what's the best way to do it? Should I bill shipping as a separate cost, or should I just bundle it in with the product? And I always tell them the best way to do it is is to try to offer it for free, but you also have to make sure that the shipping cost is still bundled into the price of the product their customers wish to purchase. And when you do it that way, it looks like that they're only paying one price, which technically they are at face value, but on the business side of things, it's two separate costs. But that's one thing. A lot of retailers, they try to offer free shipping in some capacity. Amazon is especially notorious for doing this, especially if you have an Amazon Prime membership. Online shopping, that's one thing that I really wanted to talk about here, because online shopping is killing category killers. Category killers are businesses that focus on one certain category. Bed Bath & Beyond is one of them because they're focused on housewares. Circuit City was focused on electronics. Barnes & Noble is focused on books. They're all category killers, but the rise of larger retailers such as Target and Walmart, for example, are killing category killers, and I think we all know why. It's because they carry multiple categories of products under one roof. It adds convenience to the customer who wants to be able to go to one store, a diverse set of categories. It eliminates the need of having to go to many different shops. Category killers sadly kill mom and pop shops, and we're all about supporting small businesses here at CDG. But your larger big box chains sadly are killing category killers and mom and pop shops. Guess what's also harming their own foot traffic? Online shopping. More people are shopping online now these days. Due to COVID, online shopping has increased more than ever. Here's the thing, it's all about following the trends. If you are not where your customer is at, if you're not monitoring the customer trends, guess what? You're going to go out of business. Tuesday Morning was not very big on e-commerce, for one thing. They put all their focus on trying to keep their brick and mortar stores going. And as a result, what did we see? Low sales, high amounts of inventory that wasn't getting sold, and extremely large amounts of debt that they had to repay. It goes back to what Justin was saying earlier. They were saddled with debt, and as a result, they couldn't pay off their debts from sales because they weren't getting any sales. When I went into Tuesday Morning, right before they closed down about a few months ago, it was a ghost town. And even when I went there a few years ago, back in 2021, same problem. It was a ghost town. There's barely anybody in there. It's very quiet. The shelves were still fully stocked with unsold merchandise, and chances are a good chunk of that merchandise went back to the warehouse as soon as they closed down that store, because the store that I went to closed down a few months prior to their overall liquidation. So chances are that's what happened. Even their warehouse in Dallas, which also doubled as one of their retail stores and also served as a distribution center, was rumored to have shut down and all their inventory abandoned inside of it. The landlords pretty much took ownership of whatever was left inside their warehouse. They had so much unsold inventory that they had to abandon all of it. And that was also true for several of their stores. Tuesday Morning walked away from a lot of leases. When they walked away from their leases, their stores were still fully stocked with inventory that was unsold. Now, if they had put a stronger focus on e-commerce, chances are it would have been a much different story for them today. They would not be facing this bankruptcy problem. E-commerce is where it's at now. So all the small businesses out there, if you're thinking about selling products and you want to operate both a brick and mortar store and an online store, that's great. But make sure that you understand that e-commerce is truly where you're going to get most of your business. If you don't see a lot of people walking into your store, maybe it's just quiet, there's not many people coming in, that's because people prefer to shop online. There are a few exceptions to where brick and mortar will help the customer out versus e-commerce, such as if you're selling clothing and the customers want to be able to see how a certain particular article of clothing looks on them, then that's where brick and mortar will probably be more beneficial, because you can offer dressing rooms. But for the most part, online shopping is rising and it's not going away anytime soon. People are shopping from their phones now through apps. Every major retailer has an app now where people can simply sign in, make their purchases from their phone. If they offer some sort of rewards program, they can also redeem their points right there in their phone too. It's important to quit relying on older methods of marketing as well. If you're still relying on newspaper ads, for example, or coupon mailers, you're not going to see a big redemption rate. But if you're offering coupon codes that can be redeemed for special offers online, you can expect to see more revenue coming in. You can expect to see more customers, which in turn will lead to more revenue. Now let's talk about Bed Bath & Beyond. One of their biggest problems was that they failed to keep up with the times. times. Walmart and Target were keeping their houseware section stocked with more modern looking and affordable merchandise. Bed Bath & Beyond, however, didn't really bother making their in-store displays look very attractive. Some of their merchandise wasn't very modern looking to begin with, and it was expensive. And the same also goes with Tuesday Morning. A lot of their stores had an older feel to them, and a lot of the merchandise that they had was really expensive and not worth the prices they were charging. Therefore, there was no interest. People weren't coming in. It's sad to say these two companies pretty much brought their own deaths to them. It could have been a different story for them if they had really focused on keeping their stores looking more modern with better merchandise than what they were selling, and then of course having better pricing points. But that wasn't the case. And then, of course, there was this lack of focus on e-commerce. They over-invested into their brick-and-mortar stores that people were not shopping at.
I find that when you fail to respond to your customer where your customer is at, you're going to lose them. Because if you do not meet the customer on the app on their phone, that's a sale you're going to lose. Because people shop on their phones now. Because they like the convenience of being able to shop on their work break and be able to pick up the order on their way home from work, or be able to schedule a pickup later on in the week when they have spare time and they can get to the store. And especially if you offer a local delivery option, some people with limited mobility can't physically show up at your store for whatever reason. Maybe they don't own a car, maybe they don't have a license, or maybe it's both, they don't have a license or a car and don't wish to pay the prices of a ride share, because those can get expensive. And when you're meeting a triple whammy of that, the default option is to shop on your computer or on your phone from your house. And it can also lead to higher sales because they're more likely to browse for a longer time through an app or a website than they would in a physical store because of travel constraints. But when you take out the travel constraints on them and you can show them merchandise that's of equal quality to what they were considering for a better price elsewhere in your warehouse, they will stay loyal to your brand for the long haul. Because everybody's out looking for the best quality they can get for the cash they're willing to spend. And if you are not meeting your customers where they're at, the sales you lose are going to be the profits that are lost.
That's true. A lot of these retailers are guilty of not being where their customer is at.
So on the topic of being where the customer is at, I think another problem, at least with the brick and mortar, is that so many of these places tend to be very, very car-centric. They tend to be in places where it's almost impossible to get there, at least not very comfortable to get there, unless you go by car. And what is the one thing people aren't doing as much anymore, right? Gas prices are going crazy. I mean, I don't know that you can really find a halfway decent car, even a used car, what would have been a reasonable price maybe 5 years ago. So it's like more and more people are not driving. They're being forced to do other things like walk or bike or scoot. I mean, even the cities are investing in that a little more, where they have the e-scooters. My city just recently added Bird and Spin. They had just added those here in town in addition to the Birds that were already here. So I think that definitely has a little bit to do with it. And, there's even one business here where they literally only have a drive-through. So if you were walking, you'd literally have to go up to the window, and hopefully they don't get mad at you for trying to use the drive-through, if you're walking or biking or whatever. You literally, in that respect, you kind of do the same thing, cutting off the customers that you otherwise would have gotten. In the same way that if you don't have the online stuff, then you're also cutting off the online people who are using their phones. I mean, what am I doing right now? I'm using my phone. So it's like, it's a convenience thing in a way.
Right. It's all about convenience these days, and online shopping is a major convenience for the average consumer. Like Justin said, everybody is on their phones, and if they're not on their phones, where are they? They're at a computer. They're either at one or the other. The majority of people using their phones and their tablets because of how portable these devices are. It's important to have a good online strategy if you're going to be selling products. Bed Bath & Beyond and Tuesday Morning both had poor online strategies. Their websites didn't really have much to offer. They put more focus on their brick and mortar stores, which I feel is the reason why they let themselves to their own downfall. And drive-thrus are also major conveniences too, especially if you are in the food business. But if you're driving or maybe you're walking, guess what? Maybe you don't want to go inside the store. That's why stores offer curbside pickup now too. You could place your entire order where? Online. And after you place your order online, you just go to the front of the store, which is usually reserved parking spaces up front for curbside pickup, and they bring it to you. People like convenience. If you can buy everything you want online and go pick it up yourself or have it delivered to your home, it saves you a lot of time and money. You don't have to deal with the hassle of fighting traffic or dealing with busy parking lots and long lines, especially during the holiday season. These problems are much bigger during the holidays than they are during other times of the year, but people want that convenience. They don't want to deal with any of that.
I'd like to expand a little bit on the convenience of like having stuff delivered. There's even a local drugstore here in town that will literally deliver your drugs as long as you're in Cheyenne or kind of in the vicinity. I've heard that they even will, I forget the little town that's a little bit out south and east of Cheyenne, but they'll go even a little ways outside of Cheyenne to make sure that they can serve their customers. And of course, in their situation, they've talked about how they kind of have a little bit of advantage in a way because they got a lot of like office space around their space. So, this is a smaller business, by the way. This is a locally owned place. They've talked about how they got like office places around the area. So like, they do have more parking in that respect. The parking tends to be less prone to being filled up. And on top of that, this place is actually in the downtown area. So it is in a more walkable place anyway. So they're not really cutting that part of it off, in addition to all the online stuff and all that. And you can call in, like seems like it's pretty convenient based on everything that I've heard from them, is between talking to them and everything like that.
That's very important right there. Having that convenience of delivery just makes things better for the customer. It makes the overall customer experience much greater. And what happens when you give your customers a good experience? They end up becoming a repeat customer. This pharmacy, this drugstore that you're telling me about, sounds like that they have their strategy down to pat in terms of offering a good customer experience. How you treat your customer while they're purchasing from you is just as important. And sadly, too many businesses drop the ball when it comes to that. Now, one other thing that I also wanted to mention was another reason why Bed Bath & Beyond ended up going out of business is because they just failed to keep up with the times. They didn't even bother selling any of the 200 best-selling items within kitchen appliances and personal electronics during the 2021 holiday season. They didn't even bother to carry these products. So guess what? Their customer base went to one of their competitors. They most likely went to Walmart, or they may have even shopped on Amazon, most likely. Amazon, being that they are strictly an online retailer, most likely gets more business than any brick and mortar retailer you can think of. It just doesn't make sense how a company can neglect consumer demand as well as drop the ball on customer experience. I'm talking about their website. Their website just didn't offer enough.
I agree, because if you're not offering products that your customers want, they're not going to shop at your company. They're going to go to your competitor. And the key here is that you've got to do customer profiling so that you know who your target audience is. For example, the auto insurance companies, Allstate, Geico, Progressive, The General, just to name 4 of them off the top of my head, do not target people who don't have driver's licenses. Why? Because people without a driver's license don't need the products they offer, more than likely, when it comes to auto insurance.
It's important to understand who your customer is. And when you're starting any type of business, you need to know exactly who you're selling to. Who is your ideal customer? I've talked about this many times with different clients. Too many people make the mistake of saying that your customer is everybody. Your customer is not everybody. You have to really hone in on who your customer is. What is their lifestyle habits? What age group are they in? What are some other major characteristics about their overall daily life include? You got to know specifics. Where do they live?
Exactly, because if you aren't localizing your customer base to people you know would be interested in your products, then you're shooting yourself in the foot in the form of lost sales from non-targeted advertising. If you don't properly target your customers, they're not going to know what you offer.
That's correct. Business owners in general will never know what to offer if they're going to go through their business life believing that their customer is everybody. They'll never be able to write proper ad copy, and even ad agencies won't work with them until they understand who their customer truly is. Because if they try to work with an ad agency, that's what they're going to tell them. They're going to tell them, you need to know who your customer is. They can't just write random copy. I want to start talking about some brands from the past that many people probably have forgotten about of. Before we do that, I'm just going to mention one last thing about Bed Bath & Beyond is that one other strategy that really killed their company is the fact that they dropped national well-known brands for their private label in-house brands. A lot of people prefer brand names for the most part, and Bed Bath & Beyond decided to drop national brands, most likely as a way to save money so they could focus on their own private label brands.
That was not a great strategy. And the reason why is because people prefer brands they know they can trust or that they have previous experience with that have proven reliable in the past. And yeah, okay, brand quality can change over time, but unless you are a loyalist, the quality, most of the time, many consumers are brand loyal. And nowhere is that more evident than in smartphones because most iPhone users go back to iPhone. Most Android users go back to an updated version of the same brand of phone that they've had before. To minimize the need to learn a completely different platform. And if you're not offering well-known brands that people recognize on a day-to-day basis, such as Wall Tools or Black & Decker tools, instead of some private brand that only your retailer carries, then people are less likely, unless they know a thing or two about quality, going to purchase your store brand unless they know for a fact or unless you can convince them based on price to at least try it out.
I agree. Brand loyalty is what keeps people coming back. If they enjoy a product that they have purchased of a brand that they're loyal to, they're going to continue to buy from that same company. When it comes to brand loyalty, it's all about making sure that you give your customers who frequently buy your products to make sure that they enjoy them to the point that they're telling everybody about it. They're creating buzz about it, basically. Yeah, brand loyalty is what keeps people coming back. When it comes to off-brands, people tend to shy away from them because people don't really know what to expect from them, versus if they're looking for a specific brand of a specific product they're already familiar with, they're going to buy it, no questions asked. It's going to come flying off the shelf. In fact, European supermarket chain Aldi once focused on selling their private label brands only, but then they realized that in order for them to truly be successful, at least here in the United States, when they expanded here, they started carrying all the national name brands as well that they normally didn't carry. 100% of their stores previously were all private label brands, and then they started carrying name brands when they realized that it was time to change up their strategy to get more customers in.
I kind of think the loyalty can kind of go either way in a matter of speaking, because if you do something that annoys the customers to death, then they don't want to go back to you again. So I think on some level, it's good to still have an alternative to the main brand. You definitely still want the name brand for sure, because yeah, at the end of the day, a lot of people do tend to trust the name brands. They know that they're probably going to be pretty reliable. On the flip side, where I'm kind of going with where it can go wrong is where maybe something like Android or iPhone, right, where they don't have auxiliary ports on the phones anymore. That's an inconvenience. And of course, I mean, they seem to be wanting more and more to make it hard to where you can't even repair a device. So that means you got to end up buying a new one rather than using the existing. I know that's going kind of slightly off topic there, but I think it's still kind of related in that it's important to maintain the brand loyalty in a way that makes sense instead of screwing over the customer in the long term.
I agree. It's important to keep your products in tip-top shape as much as possible, especially during production, and ensuring that when you decide to innovate, when I say innovate, I mean get rid of certain major features like auxiliary ports, for example, you're not angering your customer base who prefer to use wired headphones, because there are still a lot of people who do. I mean, yes, I know AirPods and similar products, the world is trying to go more wireless, but you should never alienate people who are still loyal to those certain things. Just because that's becoming a new thing now doesn't mean that there aren't still some people out there using wired headphones. That could be a major inconvenience for someone who can't afford AirPods but has no problem using a conventional pair of headphones with a 3.5 millimeter jack on them. So I see what you mean there. It's important to ensure that you're still keeping certain people in mind and not alienating them altogether. Now I want to discuss some retailers of the past who have gone out of business. You know, we've probably forgotten about them personally, but many people probably still remember them. Who remembers retailers such as Ames, Montgomery Ward, Builder Square, Eckerd's, just to name a few?
Those are names I haven't heard in quite a while. And each of those, if I remember correctly, the things that took them down was lack of sales from not generating enough cash flow to pay their bills. That's why they went out of business.
They were saddled with debt. They weren't making the sales. And many of these retailers that I mentioned went under before the big e-commerce boom of the 2000s. Let's take Builders Square, for example. They were not able to compete well with Home Depot and Lowe's. And many of their consumers just started shopping at one of those two competitors of theirs. Another example would be Sears. They're not out of business yet, but they failed to truly cater to the taste of the consumers who were shopping at Walmart. They kept outdated clothing lines that didn't really appeal to today's generation. A lot of their stuff was rather expensive, and you walk into any of their stores and it felt like that you were stepping back in time, back to 1980, whatever. So it's important to keep up with the times. Know who your target market is. You have to understand that you can't stay operating like it's still 1997. When Kmart was still thriving, they're also owned by the same company as Sears. You step into any of their stores and you would have thought it was 1985 again. The stores were never modernized.
I agree. And a lot of the time, even if you modernize, if you don't keep your store designs up to date and you do not carry stuff that the consumer actually wanted, you're not going to last long as a retailer. That's why a lot of the old Kmart buildings are being taken over by storage rental companies, because those are large buildings that are otherwise sitting empty. And people need somewhere to store their stuff when they move, or for short-term college stuff and things like that. And so they're buying up these empty buildings and renting out spaces in them as secured facilities. And I think that's actually a really good use of those buildings to keep them from sitting idle.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. Those buildings have the size, they have the footprint, they have the square footage to handle such a business, such a purpose. Former Kmart and Walmart buildings, they have the square footage to accommodate such uses. I've seen them get repurposed into storage units, like you said, churches, flea markets, even schools. As much as we hate to see some of these stores close down, sadly, at least it's nice to see that their properties get repurposed into something useful that people can benefit from. It's good for the area's economy to see them continue life under other businesses rather than just sit there decaying and dying. And Draven, it's more up your expertise because on your channel you document a lot of these places regularly.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's kind of an edge to that of being quote unquote outdated, because I mean, if you go into Hobby Lobby, for instance, this is just one example. They don't really use the super modern technology. I mean, I think some of them will have like the flat screens and stuff, at least, it's a little bit more recent technology, so to speak, but like they're still using the same general design where they have to enter everything. So I think it's kind of like, if it works, then yeah, that probably shouldn't be changed. And some of the old stuff can still work just fine. On the other hand, you do have instances where it probably isn't perfect for a situation, especially if you have maybe a more complicated system in place than what maybe Hobby Lobby does in that example I gave. Another thing too with the businesses like Kmart, Walmart, etc., they tend to end up being, one, maybe a couple or three businesses, right? Like Walmart would have a McDonald's in it and maybe something else, or a Subway. Kmart even would have the Little Caesars pizzas on top of maybe a business or two else as well. But at the end of the day, for the most part, once the store goes out of business, that whole thing's just sitting wasting time until it gets replaced. And I think that's a spot where downtown kind of infrastructure, where you have buildings with several things in them, can be a little more beneficial, because if one business goes out, there'll still probably be other things on the other rooms or other floors or whatever it is that will at least continue to generate money until there can be something that replaces that other space. And I also do second the part, though, that it's definitely, at the end of the day, it is good to see the other places being replaced, because if you have it built, you might as well at least try to make something good out of it. And yeah, there are a lot of replacements, and I can't think of the city right now, but I almost want to say Westminster, maybe, sort of, kind of in that area. I even stumbled across it last night when I was going down I-25 looking through places to potentially look at in a future visit to Colorado. Like, there's one Kmart that got replaced by a school. There's quite a few Kmarts that have been replaced by storage facilities, quite a few, including the one in Casper, Wyoming. And there's also been quite a few other replacements. Sometimes even it does end up being the same kind of thing again, where, I just saw a photo earlier today where a super Kmart had been converted to Walmart. And you could tell that it was a Kmart super center, which is actually kind of ironic because usually Walmart seems like the one to tear down the building and rebuild. It's kind of interesting to just see how different things can take over, and at the end of the day, it's good to at least have something there rather than not, for sure, because otherwise it ends up having urban decay. And if it's an older, I'll finish with this. If it's an older building, like, even my Kmart, I'm sure there was asbestos in there. So, if that starts falling apart, that can be very bad for the environment and very bad for the people around it. It has to be dealt with properly. And unfortunately, when a building becomes abandoned, sometimes that doesn't always go that way. Cole Shopping Center here in Cheyenne, good example, where it was sitting for many years with asbestos all over the buildings, and it's kind of a shocker that it didn't get worse. But I think if I remember right, some of the roof actually caved on one of the buildings. So, there is kind of a concern there.
That's true. These buildings, especially if they're Kmart buildings, because a lot of them were built in the 70s and the 80s, I'm pretty sure asbestos was most likely a problem with these locations, and depending on how long they sit abandoned, they probably aren't structurally sound. And that's why it's important that as soon as these businesses close up, it's important to try to find a new tenant to repurpose them, to keep them going. It's good for the economy, it does prevent urban decay, and it also encourages entrepreneurship, because you never know, even a small business might try to set up shop in one of these buildings. For example, there is a former Kmart in Houston on Highway 6 North and Loch Katrine Drive in the Bear Creek area that has been repurposed into a go-kart track. The go-kart track is not a chain, it is a small business. So that's an example of seeing entrepreneurship at work, repurposing these abandoned buildings into something that people could actually enjoy. That's how you keep the spirit of these buildings alive. Even after their original tenant goes under, someone else can swoop in, open up a new shop, and bring it back to life. There's no urban decay, the community's happy if it's a business that they like, and the business owner makes good revenue off of it. So it's a win for everybody, basically. I personally hate seeing urban decay. There will be more urban decay if large corporations do not continue to follow the trends. They need to follow the trends, know what their customers want, stay up to date on technology, and of course keep their stores modernized, keeping them looking modern, keeping merchandise that's in style, that's trendy. You can't do what Bed Bath & Beyond did and neglect to carry some of the most hottest selling items out there like they did in 2021. They neglected over 200 products. They neglected to carry over 200 products that would have been flying off the shelves if they had chosen to carry them for Christmas that year. They would have been sold out. They wouldn't be facing this financial funk that they ended up falling into. If they also put a focus on their online store, it would have been the same story. In fact, they would have seen revenues possibly quadruple due to online sales of these products, especially during the busiest shopping season of the year. That's where they neglected. It's sad to see that this happened. When you ignore modern technology, consumer demands, and keeping your stores up with the times, you go out of business. Simple as that. That's why Sears is going out of business. That's why Kmart's going out of business. That's why we just lost 2 major retailers. And Party City and David's Bridal are pretty much on their way out now too as we speak. It's sad. If these businesses would just keep up with their online strategy and understand their consumer better, it would be a much different ending for them. They wouldn't be filing for bankruptcy right now. They would be thriving and the shareholders would be pleased. You've really got to put a focus on what's hot and what's not. And of course, make sure that your customers in the end are getting an overall stellar experience, a 5-star experience.
Business owners, the one piece of advice I can offer you, other than target your customers where they're at, on their phones, on their computers, and in some cases even on their smart TVs. Target them where they're at, number one. Number two, happy customers are often repeat customers.
I agree wholeheartedly.
I'll add to the website part of it. I think the other part is that you need to make sure your website is functionally usable. There's many websites that literally do not work when you try to use them. So it ends up completely defeating the purpose. And ends up making me go somewhere else or go inside, right? So it's like, or go into the store, I mean. So like, if you're going to do a website, which in today's age you probably should, you definitely need to make sure that your website is actually usable, that you can actually go in and use it the way it was intended, rather than just throwing up whatever and hoping for the best, because that won't necessarily work out, right? You might end up having a situation where website literally is not working properly, and that stinks. for the customer and even for you in the end, because then you don't make as much money from that aspect of it.
That's why it's important to have your website monitored at all times, and a lot of these companies do. On the smaller business side, they hire firms like mine, CDG, to monitor their websites, and then if anything goes wrong, they let us know right away and we come in and take care of it. You've got to keep your e-commerce operations running smoothly, and of course put a really strong focus on that. Social media marketing and e-commerce go hand in hand. It's also cheaper to do it this way too. Amazon doesn't really have, even though they do have warehouses, warehousing is not a problem with them because not every product that they sell on their website comes from their warehouse. They also have the Amazon marketplace where they can connect the consumer to the product and not have to bear the burden of the costs involved with warehousing and staffing and moving these products. That's the best thing about e-commerce, is that it saves you a lot of money. Where Bed Bath & Beyond, Tuesday Morning, and many of these other retailers that we've discussed sadly did not partake of those advantages, and now look where they're heading. So yeah, but yes guys, this was a great episode. I thank you both for joining me today on the show. We've got a lot of content out of here. I hope that the small business community who is listening will look at what the big guys did and learn from it so that it doesn't happen to them. Small business owners have the ability to learn what they need to know to truly start a business when they're writing their business plans. You've got to know who your target customer is, and you also need to know where do you absolutely need to spend money. If you don't need to spend money in certain areas of business, don't. Review everything is what I'm saying. Look at what some of the big guys are doing, especially if they are in your industry. If you can think of some examples of companies in your industry that have gone out of business, learn from them. What did they do wrong? Were they saddled with debt due to poor sales? Or poor sales a result of not carrying products that were in demand or were trending? Were you just outright ignoring consumer demand? Once you take a deep look into each one of those factors, you'll be able to put your business on the right path and you won't go under. You'll continue to grow and eventually attract the eyes of private investors. Think of that. That's my final word on the subject. But again, thank you, Draven, and thank you, Justin. Y'all had some great insight for today's show. It was a great one. Y'all take care now, and we'll all talk soon.